So, for today's topic, we shall see the fifth chapter, that is regarding controlling. So, now what according to you might be controlling? Or is it necessary that controlling be there? Maybe in any kind of organization. Okay. Now, controlling, if we observe or if we have to explain, now it is nothing but making something happen. Not only that, we make it happen, we try to make something happen in the way it was planned to happen. Now, if you are taking it in consideration of a business organization, it shall involve keeping the organization activities and also the functions on the right track, and also all the keeping all the activities aligned with the plans and goals. Now, when we take business organization, control, it consists of especially verifying whether everything occurs in conformity with the plan that has been adopted, whether it is happening according to the instructions that were being issued, and whether it is happening according to the principle that was established in the organization. So, if we have to speak about control, it is nothing but the process of comparing the actual performance with that of the established standards. So, what is the necessary that we do this task of, first establish the standards, then do the activity, then compare the activities that are done with the pre-established standards. Now, that is the activity we do to check if the plans are going according to the plan, and if not, we can take action so that we can correct such deviations if they are existing. Now, that is to tell this planning, organizing, or the staffing, coordinating, and directing. All of these are like preparatory steps for getting the work done. And it is only through the process of controlling management is able to maintain the equilibrium between what we call as ends and means, or what we call as output and effort. Now, if we speak about efficiency and effectivity, now controlling is the process by which the managers are able to assure that resources are obtained and also used effectively and efficiently in the establishment of, or in the accomplishment of organization's objective. Now, having said all this, now controlling is also a system when it comes to an organization. In some of the organization, this system of controlling might be effective. In some other, it might not be that effective. But for all those organizations which have designed a very good system of control, usually alerts managers of any kind of potential problems if it exists. Not only shall it alert, but also it allows them to take corrective actions whenever necessary. So, the main aim of a well designed control system is to ensure that the results are achieved according to what has been planned. So, never think that controlling is just something like a scorekeeping. Now, it is also not just plotting the course and getting location reports. It is rather like the entire activity which has to be done in a business organization. Now, this is what control means. So, what is controlling? Control is to see to that everything is going according to what has been established. So, what is controlling? Now, controlling is the process of comparing actual performance with the standards and taking any necessary corrective actions. Now, controlling is the process where managers go through to control. Now, it is the process of regulating organizational activity so that actual performance conforms to expected organizational standards and goals. So, whenever we tell controlling, it means that usually managers develop, first one is that appropriate standard they'll have to develop. They'll have to compare the ongoing performance against those standards and take steps to ensure that corrective actions are taken when necessary. Now, uh, you know, a good controlling system is usually designed to keep things from going wrong. Now, that may be not just to correct them afterwards. Now, uh, there is something called as rudder in the ship. Now, how this rudder works for the ship, same in the same manner, controlling works for a business organization. It keeps the organization moving in the proper direction. Now, having said that, we can see the meaning of, the feature of control or controlling. So, now whatever has been given is a small list. Now, once again, this list is not exhaustive and it is not fixed either. So, when you go through different textbook, you might find different explanation, and you yourself understanding controlling, even you can keep your point. But say to that, it is according to the meaning of what control or controlling is. Now, actually, usually when we see this, you know, having standards, comparing the performance with the actual standards, measuring it, there are a lot of chances the employees might take into consideration such an activity to be a negative one. But controlling for a business organization is always a positive force because the main aim here would be to find whether any kind of failures are happening. Now, if such failures are happening, who is responsible for them, and especially what the organization can do about such failures. And by all these ways, control is a positive force whereby it aims to secure performance. Now, you might know how thermostat works in a refrigerator. Now, just like a thermostat in business organization, control automatically begins to operate if at all any deviation happens. Now, it is a very constructive activity which shall be designed to check deviation and also improve performance. Now, second one is control is a continuous process, and this goes without telling, because controlling or control is never one step action. Now, just as the navigator continually takes readings to ascertain whether the ship is relative to a planned course, in the same manner, the manager should do by using controlling in the business and check whether business is going in the planned course. And it shall be present from the moment any activity starts in a business organization and until its life. Now, the next thing about control or controlling we can say is that it is a forward looking activity. That is to tell, yes, we tell that activity is done, we, compare the actual performance with the set standards. When we are using this term, what we can observe is control always involves a post-mortem examination of past events. Only once the activity is done, we can compare it. So it definitely involves a post-mortem examination of past events. Hence, there are chances that it is often viewed negatively. As a policing or watchdog kind of job. So the whole exercise of looking back is meant only to improve performance in future, as past cannot be controlled in any way. Now this controlling, it does not wait till the train gets derailed. It seeks to prevent the train going off the track through a close examination of past events. Now, in future, remedial actions can be taken. Now, speaking of this, a successful control process is one that affects correction to the organization before the deviation becomes very much serious. Now, the next feature about control is it is universal in nature. Now, control is one of the primary functions for every manager. Now, not only it is a work of every manager, it shall be present under at every level of management also. Now, managers at every level have to check deviations from standards set things right quickly, and keep their business on course. Now, the process of management shall always be incomplete without controlling. Now, the next one is control is dynamic. Now, dynamic, the word itself tells that it is ever changing. Not only ever changing, it should, for the matter, should also be highly flexible. Now, control is never a static activity. It shall always be a dynamic one. It is always, it always enables change, and therefore it shall always be flexible in nature. Now, if we closely observe how things happen in a business organization and consider the time from when a goal has been established to the time it has reached, there are a lot of things that can happen in the organization and its environment to disrupt movement towards the goal or even to change the goal itself. So a properly designed control system can help managers anticipate, monitor, and respond to all such changing circumstances. The next feature is that control is always a goal oriented activity. Now we have studied every other function of management, and one feature of all the function is that they are goal oriented. Now the one main thing that every function sees to that they reach the stated goal in the best possible way. Now, even control guides activities towards predetermined goals. The main focus shall always be on achieving results, check deviations if any, and take remedial steps within the time. So, control is not an end in itself, but only a means to achieve predetermined goals. Now, one more feature of this controlling is about the delegation. And they tell that delegation is the key to control. Now, a manager gets authority to use the resources of business organization and thereby achieve results. And for this to happen in a better way, we should always delegate. Now, without such authority, the manager may not be in a position to effective rectificational steps within the time specific. And also it should be remembered that to put activities along right path, a manager requires enough authority so that he can control anything and everything that comes within his jurisdiction. Now, the next thing that is that control is based on planning. Now, what is this relation between planning and controlling? Understanding this is one of the important things. Now, a system of control always has the existence of certain standards within it. Now, what are the standards? Standards are nothing but they are pre established levels of either quality or quantity, which is used to guide performance in the business organization. Now, when we said plan, now these plans, they usually give the standards of performance, which in turn acts as the basis for the control in the business. And this is how planning and control are closely related to one another. Now, once a business comes up with plan, control is necessary to measure the progress of work. Now, planning is useful only when there is effective control. Now, planning without control will always be meaningless. And in the same manner, control is blind without planning. That is to tell, if at all the targets are not set in advance, what will the manager control? Managers shall not have anything to control. Therefore, planning defines the goals while control keeps actions along the desired line with the view to achieve results. And this is how we can say that planning and controlling are virtually inseparable. Or we can also tell that planning and controlling are thereby Siamese twins of a management. Now, it is often said, if you have observed, that planning is looking ahead and controlling is looking back. Generally, plans are prepared keeping present conditions and a likely future changes in mind. In that sense, planning may be viewed as informed anticipation of future. Now, in a way, it is a deliberate attempt to influence and control the effects of change. Now, it helps managers to affect rather than accept the future. Whereas, speaking of control, it seeks to improve performance on the basis of experience that has been gained in the past. And evidently, one cannot control what has already happened, but effective steps can be taken to prevent the reoccurrence of all those events which are undesirable to the organization. And that is where we can tell that control is both looking back and looking ahead. Now it tries to find out whether things have gone wrong and initiate timely remedial steps to accomplish results in a smooth way. Now, um, while we were discussing, we spoke a relation that exists between planning and controlling. So definitely there exists a connection between planning and control. At the same time, there is some distinction between the two. That is to tell, they are not one and the same. There are some kind of points with the help of which we can definitely differentiate planning and controlling. Now, if we take into consideration on what these two things focus, now planning usually is a impersonal activity. It takes into consideration long range problems of the business organization. There is maybe A plan is done for 5 years, 10 years. Whereas controlling is a very much personal activity. Now, this has been said because in a business organization, the activities are normally done by the employees of the organization. And usually, it takes into consideration the immediate issues. Now, on what do we plan? Or on what does plan relies on? Or what does controlling relies on? Now, planning, it relies on estimates, whereas controlling, it relies on specific data for the business. Now, who spends more time on this? When it comes to planning, it is top management which puts a lot of priority for this particular thing. Whereas controlling, operating and lower level people usually spend more time. Now, speaking about structure, planning is usually less structured because you know what you have to do and you, based on what data is available, based on what is workable, we usually come up with a plan. And normally it would be less structured or flexible enough so that we can change as we move along. Whereas speaking about controlling, it definitely is highly structured because you have already a set standards, and according to that set standard, anything that happens in the organization is expected to move. Now, speaking about the evaluation, planning is difficult to do. It is difficult to evaluate. It usually takes time to visualize what impact a particular plan is having on the business organization. Speaking about controlling, the results are visible, especially when situations are stable and not so complex in nature. So these are some of the point of distinction how we can differentiate planning from controlling. So the next topic that we can discuss is regarding the importance of control. Now we shall see why controlling is important for any business organization. Now it goes without telling that control is an essential part of every business organization. Now, the management process shall always be incomplete, and there are chances that sometimes it can be meaningless without this function of control. Now, without control, the target of business shall only remain on paper, and there are chances that it tends to use resource in a very reckless manner, and managers might find everything or every activity in business in a chaotic manner. The absence of control could be very costly and also unproductive. So, a good system of control puts end to all such confusion, all such ambiguity, all such chaoticness in the business, and offers some very advantageous situation for the organization. So the importance of control, you can consider them to be the advantages to business organization also. The first one is that it helps in achievement of goals. Now, as we spoke the same thing in the features, controlling is always a goal oriented process. It keeps activities always on the right track. And whenever things goes off the rails, remedial steps are undertaken immediately. Now, every attempt is made to confirm events, to set targets, and thereby achieve results efficiently and effectively in the business. The next one is it helps in execution and also revision of plans. But how? Now, it is through controlling that appropriate steps are taken to ensure that each plan is implemented in a predetermined way. Now, controlling helps measure progress. It also makes it, or it also uncovers any deviations. It indicates corrective steps and thus keeps everything on track. Of course, when conditions change in a very dramatic way, controlling helps to review, revise, and also update the plans. And not only it does these things, it also gives valuable feedback. It also gives information for the managers. Information may be regarding revealing any kind of shortcomings in the plans and thereby helping preparing other plans for future use. Now, speaking more about this, controlling also brings order and discipline in the organization. Now, in the task of pursuing goals, managers and their subordinates often commit mistakes. Now, these mistakes are not intentional. These mistakes happens on the way of doing things. For example, problems are diagnosed incorrectly, lesser quality inputs are ordered, wrong products are introduced, poor designs are followed, and so on. These may be some of the example for the mistakes. Now, a control system helps check such, problems before they might turn into serious problems in the business organization. Now, somebody likes controlling or not, or the employees like a control system or not. It always has a healthy impact on the behavior of the subordinates. Now, if they become cautious while doing their activities or duties, if we have to specify, and they shall always be aware that their all actions are observed at every other stage. Now, it is not taking away somebody's freedom, but it is the way things are made better in the business organization. Now, importance also facilitates decentralization of authority in the organization. Now, we can see that whenever a manager delegates his work to lower levels, they must also ensure that the subordinates do not deviate from a predetermined course of action. And in doing so, a system of control ensures this by forcing subordinates to conform to plans. Now, the feedback information helps managers check whether actions taken at lower levels are in line with what has been planned or not. Now, it helps to measure progress, check deviation, and adjust operations from time to time. Controlling also promotes coordination. Now, in the features, we saw how planning and controlling are integrated with one another. Here we can observe how coordination and controlling are integrated. Now, control facilitates coordination between different departments and division by providing what we call as a unity of direction in the business organization. Now, individuals and their activities are trying to set of common objectives. Such a unified focus ensures accomplishment of results efficiently and effectively. Now, controlling also helps coping with uncertainty and changes. Now, uncertainty and changes, here we are speaking in terms of business environment. Now, the environment in which organization operate is complex and ever changing. Now, new products emerge, innovations come up, new regulations are passed, and many things happen. Now, the organization needs to keep a watchful eye on such development and respond intelligently. A control system helps in checking whether the diversified product lines are giving healthy margins. Now, the sales from each region are improving or not, whether the products are accepted in the marketplace or not. The constant monitoring of all these key areas helps management encash opportunities that usually might be thrown up from time to time. And timely actions can also be initiated to prevent mistakes from becoming serious threats for the organization. Now, having said that, it is time to see the limitations of controlling. Now, speaking about limitations or drawbacks of controlling, now the base view of control itself is negative. It is saying something like watchdog or a thing wherein we use or we restrict the freedom of employees or we point out the mistakes of employees. But then controlling should not be viewed so. However, controlling neither is always on the credit side of the ledger. Now, a business organization, it usually has very less control over external influence and external environment. And not only that, the employees of the organization, maybe any kind of organization, neither they do like to be watched from very close quarters and offer resistance when the regulations are too tight and rigid. So setting control points over important areas is never that easy. Now, it is always expensive and takes lot of time and effort on the part of manager. Now, after all such difficult exercise, to compound or to solve the problems further, the evaluation process throws in additional challenge. Now, certain areas can be measured precisely, but then there are many areas, unfortunately, defy measurement in qualitative terms. To give an example, especially the elements of human behaviors or the elements of employee morale and job satisfaction, all such elements are difficult to measure. While establishing the control points, management has to pay attention to these problems and proceed in a cautious way without rubbing individuals on the wrong side. So, this is some of the limitations in a brief. Now, it's time to see the controlling process. Now, unless in the same manner how other process, I mean, how the process of other managerial functions are, in the same manner the controlling process is. Now, basically, if we see the controlling process has four main steps. That is, first step wherein which you establish the standards of performance. The second step, you measure the actual performance. Now, once these two are done, then the task is to compare the actual performance with the standards. And the process shall be finished when corrective actions are taken. Only if it is required, only when there is a deviation, you shall be taking a corrective action. So, the fourth step is corrective action where required. And along the process, that is from the beginning of the step 1 until the step 4 is done, there is something called as feedback. Now, this shall always exist. Now, this particular control process was given by Baden and Gluck in their book or in their research book. So, the first step is establishment of standards. Now, standards are nothing but the targets against which all other coming or subsequent performance shall be compared. Now, they are by definition simply criteria of performance. Now, they serve as the benchmark because they specify acceptable level of performance. Control standards can be broadly divided into two categories, that is, quantitative standards and qualitative standards. Now, speaking of quantitative standards, they are generally which can be expressed in physical or monetary terms. Now, such standards are set up in respect of production, finance, sales, and so on. Now, where results can be measured in exact quantitative terms, quantitative standards may be, can be divided whenever it comes to a business organization or especially a product oriented organization further into time standards, cost standards, productivity standards, and revenue standards. Now, if I have to tell about time standards, it states the length of time that is taken to make a certain performance or a certain service. Now, if we take into consideration a pilot. Now, even a pilot has a standard time span within which he has to make certain trip. Now, speaking of cost standard, they are based on the cost of producing the goods or services. Maybe to give an example, the example may be the material cost might be rupees 10 per unit. Now, cost standard specify the cost limit within which results should be achieved. Now, speaking about productivity standard, now this standards of productivity, they are based on the output of goods or the service during set time period. Now, to make it more understandable, product standard would be something like employee employee has to complete 10 units or he has to serve 150 customers per hour. Then comes the revenue standard. See, there is a difference between what cost is, what revenue is. Do not mix the two. Okay? Cost is very much different from revenue. Now, these revenue standards, they arise from attaching monetary value to sales. Now, these may include standards as revenue per passenger, mile, you know, maybe average sale per customer or sales per capita, and so on. Now, these are some of the quantitative standards. So, what are qualitative standards? Now, standards of quality are based on level of perfection desired in respect of certain intangible items such as goodwill, employee morale, industrial relations, and so on. Now, test, service, and sampling techniques are usually used to improve human attitudes and drives in respect of all the standards before specifying a limit. So, if these are the two kinds of standards, now the next question arises, how to set standards? Now, when it comes to controlling, now the setting standards for every other operation is an inseparable task in the management. Now, the first thing is that before setting standards, executive must study the characteristic of the work. Now, the executive must consider ordinarily flexible and generally acceptable levels of good performance in terms of work characteristics. And as the nature of work differs with every option, with every unit, with every operation, the characteristics are different and so are the standards. And standards are set thus depending on the characteristic of the task. So, a question might arise as to what are the requirements of performance standards. Now, if it has to be put in list, pen, and paper, then it shall be like, it should be set in precise quantitative terms. Quantitative terms are always better than qualitative standards. Now, these standards, they should be flexible enough so that they can be modified whenever it calls for one. And one more important requirement is that it should be clear and understandable by all. Not only that, standard should be something workable. It should not be such a thing where it is not workable at all. That is to tell, acceptable range of deviations should be laid down, and it should be workable and equally acceptable. And standards should also be such that it can take care of all strategic points that cover the entire organization. And standards should be revised periodically, and it should be kept up to date. So this is the first step in the control process. Now I know you have heard for 50 long minutes. So please take a break of 10 minutes and join back the meeting at around 11:05 so that we can discuss further more things in today's session.